I'm Chris Farrell, and this is On Watch. Welcome, everybody, to On Watch, the Judicial Watch podcast, where we take a deep dive on topics that the mainstream media would choose to just slide right on by, where we try to recover lost history and explain the inexplicable. Thank you for taking time to join us today. Be sure, if you're watching us on YouTube or Rumble, to subscribe to us. If you're listening on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, be sure to subscribe and leave us a rating. We'd like to get your feedback on how this show goes and who you'd like to see. Today we got a real treat for you. We're joined by my friend and colleague, Jonathan Alexandre, who is Senior Counsel for Government Affairs at Liberty Counsel. Jonathan, welcome to On Watch.
Thanks so much for having me. Really
Great to have you with us.
Likewise.
All kinds of stuff to talk about.
I think so.
We can talk about public policy stuff. We can talk about legal questions. We can talk about the courts and candidates, and it's almost an endless list. But I think right off the top, because I saw so much news coverage and I want to say Twitter, but I guess X feed on it, it seems like everybody's getting all wound up again to go back into COVID world.
Yeah.
Your organization has done some tremendous work, very important work, with respect to COVID and the military. Give our viewers and listeners a little feel for the kind of stuff you're doing.
Sure, certainly is. At the onset of COVID, it was reactionary from governors, of course, from the then sitting president, as to what was actually happening. But then you saw a sudden surge of authoritarianism, tyranny coming out of all branches of government, including the Department of Defense. And in August of 2021, you saw a widespread requirement that every service member had to be vaccinated with this aborted fetal tissue concoction that many had religious exemptions or religious desires not to participate in it. And,
right.
The military, despite, when you go through boot camp, you are given shots on either arm. You sort of walk through a gauntlet of getting shots, but you also always have an exit ramp. You have the ability to say no to certain things based on your religious convictions. And so that ought to have applied to these service members as well, but not under COVID. We saw Secretary Austin have a blanket rule that if you weren't injected with this shot, you could no longer serve. And it's the drama by which they had these service members endure basically interrogations by chaplains, by JAG officers, forcing them to choose between their faith and ultimately the service that they wanted to commit to this nation. And so we got involved early on. We would hold at the outset just conference calls where we would have service members call in and they would ask questions. And then it got to 600, 700 service members that were calling in each night. And so we had to split up the calls between several attorneys. Then we realized we just had to file suit. We had to go after the Department of Defense. And so we did. We filed a comprehensive lawsuit. We filed it for all 6 branches of the military, including the Space Force, who had members that were being separated. Our most forward case was our Marine case, where we were able to win injunctions, stays on them applying this unconstitutional order against Marines.
And what that really, time out is what that really is. It's the court saying, take no further action, stand by, hold, stop.
Yeah, exactly right. And which would be fine. I think in certain regards, injunctions work to people's benefits in the civilian world. But in the military world, it means you're just where you are. And so even if you're going to your next duty station, you don't get orders to where you can move to next. The military is not moving you. We had members having to pay out of pocket for their hotels, their families not able to travel with them, not able to travel to get additional training. And so there were issues of whether or not they'd be able to increase in rank. A holding pattern for a military member, a service member, was not a good place to be, but that's probably as best as we can get.
And besides the holding pattern, I think it's important, because I also heard communications from folks. There were all sorts of intimidation and mind games and sort of Stalinist tactics that were used against military members who had a legitimate religious conviction that they didn't want to take the shot. And they really got jerked around. All kinds of little twisted games to pressure them, to exclude them, to mark them. give a couple of examples if you can.
As young as privates or even cadets, guys that were in military training schools, they're early outset, first introduction to the military, and they're being, having pressure from peers, as it were, but certainly the command challenging their ability or their commitment to serve the nation just based on their religious convictions. And so you saw individuals not quite in hostile interrogation settings, but really having your commanding officer, having a chaplain ask particular details about your faith, which is something that America has never done. There's never been a religious test to be able to participate in the military. Certainly the First Amendment has always given individuals a way out not to do something. But you saw so much pressure coming down from the top. And it was, if you sort of reverse engineered it to see where it was coming from, it was the higher ups. It was as far up as Secretary Austin really putting the squeeze on the men and women of our service who just wanted to continue serving the country.
And so I heard stuff like people couldn't use certain facilities on post, or they weren't permitted to, they couldn't access the PX or the commissary.
Exactly right.
There were just efforts to manipulate and to pressure and to stigmatize people, under the grounds of, well, this is a health and safety issue.
Right.
And it wasn't.
It was never health and
it was
safety.
Intimidation. It was manipulation. It was a lot of gamesmanship, really.
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right in that. Certainly the isolation, placing people away from their units, causing them, as it were, for them to be derelict in their duty, not being able to perform the tasks that they signed up to perform, that they were trained to perform based on this vaccine. And so you had minimal instances of individuals not being able to sit with their unit in the mess halls, but as great as not being able to go on missions with them, or probably, and I've mentioned this before, the one situation that was continuous was, we're just not going to move you. You're going to be stuck in your prior duty station, and if you don't show up, as you well know, you're derelict. You're not showing up to your next assignment, but we're not giving you an assignment. We're not going to move you, even if it's halfway across the country, and you're going to have to start paying for your family to stay at hotels. When it affected the family, when it affected the service members' ability to do the job that they signed up to do, that's when it got egregious.
So DOD changed its policy.
They were forced to, as it were, and we did have a fight in Congress. Our group, there were a group of retired generals, the Stars, that advocated pretty heavily for, I think, what could have been the entire pie. The NDAA in 2022 had the opportunity to have all this go away. They could have restored individuals. They could have given them back pay. They could have ended, as it were, these orders. We got probably 40% of what we wanted in terms of them through the NDAA limiting Secretary Austin from his order, rescinding it. It didn't go as far in saying that he could never bring it back. What it did in the legislative circle kind of affected us in the legal sphere as well, because you had judges now saying, well, didn't you guys get everything you wanted from Congress? Why are you still in court? And we had to go back to court several times and say, no, you don't understand. There are so many more service members that haven't been fixed, and the lid is still off. At any point, Secretary Austin can walk back in and decide that he wants to punish these individuals again. And so what Congress did was fine, and we lobbied. They could have obviously done more. Senator Cruz had a great amendment that would have fixed this thing in its entirety. It's been voted down twice now, 2 opportunities that Congress had.
You talk about disconnected from reality.
Yeah.
They don't understand the impact on families. They have no understanding of the impact. This is not just people moving around on a board. It's not a game. You have some highly trained and qualified, specialized service members, people like fighter pilots.
Exactly right.
People like Navy SEALs or Delta guys who have gone through decades of training.
Exactly right.
Millions of dollars expended on their professional development, education, skill set, and they're being told, nah, beat it, get out of here.
Yeah, you don't just replace a guy like that.
Or people that are at the 18-year mark of their career.
And that was difficult. Seeing lieutenant colonels that are given their entire lives, adult lives, to service, just being dismissed.
Goodbye, good luck, and nothing for it.
Yeah.
So, the drum beat's already going.
Yeah.
There's whispers and there's memos and there's talk about, We got to be ready for the next wave.
Yeah.
I mean, it's performance art.
Right.
It is this virtue posturing, medical hysteria that they're getting teed up.
Yeah.
And they're doing it this fall so that they can do it next fall, meaning election
right around
season.
the election time. You're absolutely right.
Because they're trying to condition the public. It's all psychological conditioning.
Exactly
it's all
right.
gamesmanship. So what's your feel on where we are? What do you see happening or unfolding?
From a very, I guess, practical monetary standpoint, there's PPP money still out there, and there are vaccines that have been bought that they need to sell, right? And so at a very practical level, government wants to get a return on the investment that it gave to Pfizer and to Moderna for the vaccines. So that a lot of the push is that. And you ask hospital executives, they'll say the same thing. They're just ramping it up to get these vaccines that they've already bought out to the public. So there's that practically. But tyranny and authoritarianism is it's addictive. The control that they had over the masses, their ability to shut down churches for the first time in American history, to say that churches couldn't meet, their ability to track people and follow them.
But liquor stores and abortion clinics,
marijuana,
that was essential.
Shops.
But being able to go to a church and worship, no way.
You could
shut that down.
You could protest with 100,000 people literally on the street, but
Right.
if you stood shoulder to shoulder with someone and decided to worship God, you were not allowed to do that. We had several cases. We had to go up to the Supreme Court 4 times on behalf of churches, finally winning a comprehensive victory against the state of California. Governor Newsom, of course, as he'd have lavish parties, wouldn't allow more than 10 people to gather in a Bible study in their own homes.
Right.
And so we had to fight that and win that. But 2 things occurred during COVID. We saw how easy it was for the American public to say, because of fear, we're going to allow government to control areas of our lives that they have no constitutional authority to do so. And second, you saw that when push comes to shove, if government wants to single out certain activities that it doesn't like, it will use as much force as law as it wants to in order to try to do that. And the fact that we're returning back to the early days of 2020 is frightening. I don't think Americans will have the tolerance for it this time. I think the COVID-19 narrative hopefully has been spun out, but the playbook is already there. They can rinse and repeat, as you said, this fall. They can do it next fall with something, if it's climate or something else they want to add to it.
Right.
They can rinse and repeat this playbook anytime that they want.
Yeah, that is the huge danger to me, is that, once the organs of the state, right, become empowered and start to be engaged, your objection, resistance, refusal, I mean, they try to move people, not just to persons that are uncooperative, but this is really an effort to criminalize people.
You're right.
Just like all the drama, all the hysteria over the 4 separate indictments of Trump.
Yep.
It's not just the indictment of Trump. They're trying to indict people, not literally, but metaphorically, indict people who are Trump supporters.
Right.
They're criminalizing people, because if you like him or you believe in him or you support him, well then you're a criminal, right? Because that is their push.
Yeah.
And again, it's psychological conditioning, because I saw this one phony on Fox, a big never Trumper, Cavuto, who threw up a question to her. Somebody said, well, he's been indicted 4 times. 91 counts.
Yeah.
He's saying he didn't do anything?
Come on.
I mean, they're offering this as some sort of logic.
Yeah.
That, well, something must be wrong because they've said it so many times. And, this is Stalin again. This is, show me the man, I'll show you the crime.
Right.
And if I dig far enough and hard enough, I'll find something, You didn't pay a parking ticket from 15 years ago. Oh, well, it's a felony,
Yeah. No, you're absolutely right to that point. I would just say to that effect, just to the criminalization of the average American, look at what Department of Homeland Security said were threats, terroristic threats. Parents at school boards, individuals that wanted to make their own medical decisions via COVID. Or if you had questions, legitimate questions asked and wanting to be answered about the election, you were considered a threat by Department of Homeland Security. And then look at how they have treated pro-lifers, the Department of Justice going after the homes, the private homes of individuals that are protesting for life. So they're already there. They're already criminalizing individuals that, yes, believe in what Trump brought to this country, but have an overall conservative, freedom-loving view of this nation. They've already criminalized us.
So, as we record this, just last evening was the Republican debate, and what I found enormously entertaining and just rich with irony. Mr. Trump goes on with Tucker Carlson and just crushes the numbers on views.
And not even on cable TV.
No,
we had to log in to find it.
It was being X'd or tweeted or whatever the right word is.
Imagine that.
So give me what's your take? What's your view of the Tucker-Trump interview and then the debate?
Yeah, I think Trump proves, every time he opens his mouth, he proves why he's the front runner. There's a man who has a meta-narrative, understands from a very big picture what this country needs and the direction ought to go in, but can also get into the weeds. One of the things I appreciated about so much during his administration is just how detailed he was, down to the drapes, as it were, down to the mechanics of how things worked. And that's so important to have an executive that has a meta-narrative, but also can get down into the weeds. And he proves that every time he talks. What was proven on the debate stage is that any one of the individuals there are much more competent than the sitting president. And so any one of them...
A potted plant is more competent than the sitting president.
I was being generous. He's up the street. But yeah, and anyone can do a better job than what we've seen. And I did like the gamesmanship. Politics is entertainment.
Yeah.
And so we got some of that. When it got to the issues, there's not much difference in terms of where this country needs to go, in terms of the Republican conservative view of where this country needs to go. Certainly it can't repeat the failures of the past 3 years. There's not much difference between them. It's a matter of who's time-tested, who's going to be true to their word, and who has the gall to actually get into office and make those changes. We already have an experience with President Trump where we saw all that.
Right.
And so,
right. I was watching, I watched at 8:55, I was watching Tucker and Trump, and then I jumped in to see the Republicans, the team B or C or D.
yeah.
What I'm astounded by is the level of ignorance on the part of that, or they're just terribly, there's three ways to look at it. They're either ignorant, they're terribly misinformed, or they're lying. Because particularly in the realm of foreign affairs and national security matters, I heard these impassioned remarks about Ukraine, and look, I wish nothing bad for Ukraine. They were wrongfully, illegally invaded. They have the right to their own country. Don't get me wrong. I'm not any kind of an apologist for Putin or anything like that. But I am an America First guy.
Right.
So a lot of high drama on Ukraine. Not a lot of discussion on our own border.
Right, absolutely right.
The immigration crisis that we face, the impacts and the consequences for Americans, native born here and now for generations, or not, even if they're recent immigrants, I don't care, but if they're lawfully here, why do their rights and their interests, why do they matter less?
Right. We're treating our citizens as second-class citizens in comparison to the efforts that we want to make across the pond. Worthy efforts, of course. The fight that the Ukrainians have put up, well worth it. Everyone knows the situation that, if they cross into a NATO country, that's going to activate us immediately.
But even that argument is preposterous. Putin can't get out of 4 eastern provinces of Ukraine.
That's very true.
He's not going to invade NATO, and he's not a moron. If he goes into a NATO country, the odds go from this phony surrogate proxy war to 32 countries on one.
I think you're absolutely right. It's good perspective.
He doesn't have. He doesn't have a suicide wish. He wants his chunk of Ukraine that historically, ethnically, culturally. You could go on and on. For whatever reason, it's been back and forth for hundreds of years. That chunk of ground, just like, frankly, the Germans and the French over Alsace-Lorraine, it's exchanged hands, over hundreds of years, several times. But that isn't the point. This phony narrative of on to the Fulda Gap in Germany is a lie. It's an enormous lie, and they keep repeating it, hoping that the American public is stupid enough to buy it or get it. So I mean, that I find that very dishonest.
Okay.
And it's irritating to me to listen to them, base an argument on this thing that's a false premise.
That's a strong point. But to your point about the border, it obviously is an invasion. One thing that's not often talked about is the amount of Chinese nationals that are down at the border, Chinese spies that are being arrested. At a time, it was the Islamic Jihad that we were worried about. We saw some of the activities of the cartel really mirror what they do in the Middle East. And so I think in the 2012s and such, it was, well, is there going to be Islamic Jihad presence? I think it's even more insidious in the Chinese and their not just their spying, but the way they can manipulate American culture through the economy, through what's going down really at the southern border. Seeing that many Chinese nationals infiltrate our border, I think, is just as bad as a threat as fentanyl, as the crime that is.
Well, I'll just say all the chemical precursors that the Chinese send, that arrive that the cartels use to generate or create fentanyl. Exactly right. The other thing is there are real needs in America's infrastructure, whether it's roads, rail, or energy independence that we at one time had under Trump, gone. Inner cities are a nightmare. And so that's why this hysteria over Ukraine, I get it, I understand what the point is, but I think the investment in America needs to come first. That's my point of view.
Yeah.
The other point that I want to get to with you is we're now in a post-Roe v. Wade environment.
Absolutely.
I think of the number of babies that are saved.
Right.
A 50-year fight finally gets to the point where the tables get turned. There's a lot of lying and a lot of misinformation about the consequences of Roe v. Wade being overturned. There's a lot of reckless talk about, well, rights are being taken away. First of all, abortion is not a right. But how do you see, I mean, there's the legal question and there's the political question.
Absolutely right.
So give me your views on where we are on those two fronts.
Yeah, so as you say, there's two tracks, and we've been fighting in the state Supreme Courts. Everywhere that there's been a state Supreme Court, whether it's South Carolina recently, Oklahoma, Kentucky, soon to be Arizona, and Florida. Everywhere that there's been a fight, we've been active in it, filing briefs, working with the state solicitors general that are actually arguing in favor of their pro-life laws, working with the attorneys general that have to defend those laws. And there's varying degrees of success. We have more wins than losses in terms of the state Supreme Courts. South Carolina was previously a pretty bad law where they saw privacy written into their constitution and said that this has to do, it didn't, but said that this has to do with abortion, having their state Supreme Court now reverse that. So a strong win in what was previously a legal track that was going to be a loss. So on the legal front, I think we're right where we need to be, allowing states to make the separation between this idea that there's a constitutional right to abortion found within their state constitutions. I think that's strong. On the political front, we aren't as successful as we will be, certainly not in a good posture right now. I think every time that it's gone to a direct vote, just recently in Ohio, teeing up this vote to their constitution, I think every time it's gone to a direct vote to the citizens, we've lost the issue. Numbers like 60-30. So it is still a lot to do on the political front.
Don't you think that's really a public information or public education question?
It absolutely is, and it's a finger in the air, test the wind sort of question. The hysteria that followed from the Democrats, organized hysteria from the baby killers pushing abortion, really caught up a lot of folks. The misnarrative really convinced a lot of people that if they take away this right, they'll take away other rights, and so you see, as many times as it's gone to the polls, that we haven't been victorious. But it's sort of like the segregation or the slavery argument. You don't test the wind and build policy off of it. You build policy off of what is principled. the right to life that is found in the Constitution, Declaration of Independence that talks about life. You build policy off of what's principled, and culture will catch up to it. No lie can live forever. I don't think abortion can sustain a freedom-loving American. It can't sustain the recent scientific exposure that we see as to what actually is going in the womb. It's not going to sustain generations of people seeing babies being formed and realizing that, yes, governors and state legislatures can do more to make adoption more accessible, can give mothers prenatal care, give them maternity care after the fact so that they're more confident about bringing babies into this world.
Right.
So I think you'll see culture say, well, since it is a killing, we're not there yet, but I think culture will move to the point of saying, since it is a killing, what can we do to make sure that that life, if it's brought into the world, is better supported? And so it may take a little longer than what we anticipated, but I think culture will ultimately get to that point of respecting life.
There are so many strong arguments that can be made, and of course, like you said, science is a big part of it because, there's technology, there's sonograms that, look,
right.
Listen,
exactly right.
Make up your mind. Is that a real live? It's a little human being, but is it a real live little human being?
Exactly
Sure,
right.
It's got a heartbeat and all kinds of,
Yeah.
That's a very compelling example. The left tries to turn it into the victimized woman being further victimized.
Yeah.
And that's like, that's half the narrative. That's half the story. I remember seeing this, you don't see them too often now, but I remember the old bumper sticker, abortion, one dead, one wounded, right? And there is never an adequate explanation, in my view, not never, that's too strong a word. There's rarely an adequate explanation of the consequences for the woman who,
right.
in dire circumstances, makes this decision. And then there's very little discussion. Okay, well, now what?
Yeah. Or the 67 to 70% of women asked post-Roe, would you bring your baby to term if your circumstances are different? And they say yes. And that usually means if the father says that he'd be part of this kid's life, I'd make a difference. Or if my financial situation was different, I wouldn't, terminate this life. And at a bare minimum, women do now have always have 9 months to prepare. From when they find out that they're pregnant to actually giving birth. And you can make great strides in supporting a woman, giving a better outcome or situation for her in those 9 months if that is offered to her. And over 70% of the time, women say that if my situation was different, I would bring a baby to term. And I think that's sort of what we need to harp on and see if we can make those fixes, whether it's policy-wise or culturally, to get more lives born and make it easier for individuals, women that are carrying children, to give birth.
That's the domestic issue.
Yeah.
Internationally, the Biden administration is pushing abortion like mad everywhere they possibly can. And then the other track of their fixation is not just abortion, but they are harping on and driving the whole LGBTQ plus, et cetera, whatever, gender identity, gender ideology. And they're doing it in an extraordinarily aggressive way to countries overseas.
Right.
And not just, I don't know that you're allowed to say third world anymore,
Yeah.
developing countries, not just places in remote areas, but in very sophisticated Western European countries,
Right.
they're trying to jam this agenda on people. Some of them don't like it or don't want it.
Yeah, the African bloc, the Arab bloc, doesn't want this, right? They'll during the Obama administration, and of course repeated now in Biden, where African countries, Caribbean countries are saying, keep your money if it comes with these abortion mandates. We don't want your abortion-related funds. We also don't want your LGBT-related funds. And there's always a fight in these U.S. embassies flying the pride flag. What is perversion, not just in general, the LGBT agenda being perversion, but in these countries, it's an actual perversion. They realize that it is damaging to their culture to push a trans ideology, but here U.S. is exporting that, intentionally placing, I think you told me this, intentionally placing ambassadors in countries
Right.
That will offend that country's culture. America has a lot to offer to this world. Our sins aren't that. We should not be offering our perversion and our sins to the rest of the world. And it's great to see these African countries and these Arab countries push back against it and say that we don't want it.
And it's really insidious the way they do it, because they'll take something that you think is sort of a straight up development package, like we're going to do ag development with irrigation, crop issues, ag economics, or we're going to do water. We're going to do water. We're going to drill wells, and we're going to develop water systems so that you have clean, fresh water, and you can use it in your homes, or you can use it out in your fields. And somehow or other, they take something like that, which is vitally important in the developing world, and they say, but you got to have abortion. And you say, whoa, whoa, whoa. Crops and agriculture and irrigation and clean water, and you're rolling abortion into this? Yeah. And like you said, I know this. My wife has done international development. She's a PhD in it. She's had leaders come to her and say, please stop. We want the water in the wells. We want the ag. We do not want any part of your social construct that you're trying to impose on us.
And they get it. They get that it's damaging for culture. I'm glad that we see the trend. It's both here and abroad. The 21 states that have banned transgender surgeries on minors. I think that's an excellent trend that have passed laws. Alabama recently vindicating its state.
And a topic that did not come up at all last night in the Republican
just completely
debate.
Avoided.
They just said, dude, not going to discuss that. Yeah. It's going to come up.
Yep.
And it's going to see, it'll be a litmus test really for who is going to go off on this never land. It's a boutique ideology that, and who's going to say, no, we've got, 7,000 years of recorded history, and this is not a part of it kind of a approach. So
I think that's a strong point. But yeah, even internationally, you're seeing Western developed states in Europe saying, we're going to put a pause on this. We're going to stop transgender surgeries on minors, because it is, it's butchery what they're doing, and it's evil. So I think we're starting to see the trend there. I hope they do, metaphorically, throw out the baby with the bathwater, that it was the LGBT agenda that brought all these evils with it, and certainly peel back and say that we cannot tolerate an agenda that is perverse at its core, and that, seeks to expand itself by recruiting individuals and by forcing individuals that have religious oppositions to it or just cultural oppositions to it, forcing them through the threat of law to buy into something that they otherwise don't believe in.
That's a huge part of it, is that it's not, there was a time when, okay, I don't believe or support what you're doing, but that's your decision and I'm not a part of it, so go do what you want to do and leave me alone.
Right.
That was a circumstance or state of affairs at a certain point. But the opposition pushing back has become so militant that they're demanding that you embrace and celebrate their personal behavior, conduct, decisions, and then complain if you pay attention. So they jam it in your face and say you must praise us for the decisions we've made with our lives. But if you say, hey, wait a minute, why are you doing this? Yeah. Well, then you're a hater.
Yeah, why
so which way is it?
Why is this, I'll take you at your face value. I'll just read the books that you're putting in my library and say, we don't really want that. Whoa, you're encroaching into our space now. Like, no, you invited us in, and it's public domain. This is an area of a culture that we all have to deal with. But you're absolutely right. As soon as we do engage and they realize that the trend is not in their favor, then it's like, no.
Then you're a hater.
Right.
Yeah. What are you working on now? What are you interested in coming up on the horizon? Give me sort of a sense of what's hot for you.
I was glad to see education come up quite repeatedly in the debates. I think there's such a trend of parents realizing that they need to have a stronger hold on their child's education. Liberty Counsel has developed a full comprehensive curriculum that we're now able to share both in home and in school settings, supplementing curriculums around the nation. We've also fought in courts for child evangelism fellowships. So these are good news clubs to be in school settings. It's about 200 times we've had to go to court in order to retain the presence of the gospel of Jesus Christ within schools. So both on taking ownership of education, empowering parents to be the educators for their children, and also in these public school settings, we've had a good approach to how we're redeeming education in this country. So I think that's some of the exciting parts of our job. Of course, every day our phones are still ringing with folks that are having religious liberty issues, whether it's a city official putting pressure on an individual to adopt something or not allowing them to have public participation based on their faith. Every day we're still getting calls on that front. But we're optimistic. I'm very encouraged that we still have an active voice in this culture, and I'm talking about our firm here, an active voice in this culture, and that there are many supporters. There are many more people that believe the same way we do that are just waiting for good, strong leadership. And we're happy we're equipped to sort of fill in that gap.
Yeah, there was a term, it goes back several decades now, but there was a term used aptly, the silent majority, right?
Absolutely.
There are many, 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 many people out there, whether they're individuals, families, who agree with the principles and the foundational fundamental beliefs that Liberty Counsel believes in, that Judicial Watch believes in, that we both fight for in our own ways. But they're overlooked.
Right.
They're not accounted for. They're not engaged with. But they're there. Their chance to express themselves is on Election Day.
Right.
That's what it really comes down to. And there's a whole lot of people with loud megaphones talking over and past them, but they really are the silent majority. Yeah. And they believe in God, and they believe in their family, and they believe in their community, and it's really bedrock Americana.
You're absolutely right.
And I trust and pray and believe that those are the people that will turn out, that will continue to support Liberty Counsel, support Judicial Watch. God bless America is what this really is about. And they need to show up on Election Day, and they need to participate and be part of the solution, and not say, oh, well, that's for somebody else, right, or that's later, or it's not somebody else and it's not later. It's you and me and the folks watching and listening, and it's right now. Absolutely. It really is right now. There's no other time to put it off. Jonathan, thank you so much for coming in and joining us. We really appreciate your time. And thanks to all of you for joining us on Watch. We look forward to having additional shows. Please be sure to subscribe and let your friends and family know about this podcast, whether you're watching us on one of the platforms out there or listening to us via podcast as an audio podcast. Be sure to share this podcast with your friends. Let them know we've got great conversations like this and many more to come. I'm Chris Farrell on Watch.